Welcome back to Inside Singapore's Sports Business. Our show features key opinion leaders from Singapore's sports industry. And this show is brought to you in collaboration with Sports Singapore and the Toad Board. I'm Adele and we are back here at the Hollandsy Club. This is the second ISSB episode covering business developments in sports. We will today be looking at sports deals and how businesses are created in the sports industry here in Singapore. Let's get started. We are back here at the Tennis Pavilion to learn more about sports businesses at a high level with our two guests. We have with us Mr. Jeremy Harvey-Samuel, Events Director at IMG, and also we have Mr. Hari Vijayarajan, Group Chief Commercial Officer at ONE Championship and ONE Esports. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to be here.
Allow us to get to know both of you better. Maybe we'll start with Jeremy. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a lot of sports management in university. I went to university in Australia, but my family live in Singapore at the moment. I'm actually half American, half British. My father's from the UK. My mum's from Guam in the Pacific, an island in the Pacific. So I've lived my whole life in Asia, Australia, Asia Pacific, around like that. When I came out of university in Australia, I had a great opportunity to move to Singapore with IMG. Coincidentally, my parents were already living in Singapore, so it was a fairly easy decision for me to make. I joined the events division in 2013. I'd done a couple internships with them prior to that, and then stayed in the events division, primarily in golf, some mass participation, Bloomberg Square Mile Relay. We did the color run as well, all the way up until now.
Did you used to play sports yourself?
I've always been a keen golfer. I play a lot of football as well, but never I think it was pretty clear early on that I was never going to make it professionally in either one of those sports. But what that did for me was it highlighted that I wanted to be involved in the sporting industry. My passion has always been sports. So it was an easy transition professionally.
Cool, thank you. How about you, Hari? What is your background?
I grew up in India. But for undergrad, I came to Singapore. This was more than 20 years ago. Studied at NTU. Always had a keen eye for sports. I was playing tennis for the university. After my undergrad, I went and did a stint at Microsoft for about 5 years, covering the Asia Pacific region for different products of Microsoft. Then I went to the States for about 7 years. Started with a master's degree in Chicago. Then I went to management consulting, Booz & Company. Then I went to Seattle and learned about the internet and e-commerce at Amazon. And then I came back to Southeast Asia and Singapore about 5 years ago to work at Lazada. And Lazada at the time was just growing into an e-commerce company and business, and spent about 4 years in Lazada, and then had the wonderful opportunity to join ONE back in 2019. Where sports business was completely new to me at the time. But I always, when I was deciding what my next career move would be, I wanted to learn something and contribute something. And I think the commercial element was something I felt I could contribute. And sports and media was something I thought I could learn. So here I am.
Right, and would you say that, being with ONE Championship is the biggest sports business event that you've been involved with so far?
Yeah, I think what attracted me to ONE was working with someone like Chatri, who's a visionary. He's a great leader. He's very passionate, and building a company out of Singapore, a sports company out of Singapore, was quite tough because Asia has always been a net importer of sports, and what Chatri and the team were trying to do was export sports from Singapore and Asia to the world. I felt that was a very interesting opportunity and decided to join the rocket ship. And
what are some of the biggest deals that you've seen so far?
The mandate I had was to commercialize the assets that ONE had across ONE Championship, ONE Esports, and ONE Studios. One thing which I loved about some of my experience at ONE was working with a brand called Tumi. Tumi is a luxury travel retailer, And this was just before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, when I was in discussions with their VP of Asia to do something across the three assets. And just before COVID hit, we struck a deal starting with ONE Esports, where Tumi would work with us across working with esports teams, working to sponsor the Dota 2 Invitational that Singapore hosted in December 2019, which had almost 100 million viewers globally. And with the success of Tumi in ONE Esports, they then came and joined us as partners at the Apprentice One Championship Edition, which aired this year. And Tumi was one of the the biggest sponsors of that. And now Tumi is working with creating an ownable asset for ONE for the martial arts belt case, for the World Championship belt case. So it's a story which I'm proud of because they started with ONE Esports, went on to our lifestyle and reality product, and finally culminates in the martial arts belt case, which is just like the Tiffany Wimbledon trophy. Tumi is doing something for the martial arts belt case. I'm pretty pumped about that deal.
Yeah.
Even when travel is down 95%. Yeah.
Jeremy, you've been at IMG events for so long. What are some of the biggest or most exciting that you've been involved?
I think the biggest and the most exciting deals that I've been a part of is really two things. One is obviously HSBC. Working with HSBC, they're the title sponsor of the event here in Singapore. They work with IMG for a lot of other golf events across the region. They are a patron partner of the Open Championship in the UK. They're the title sponsor of the WGC event in Shanghai as well. They have been a great supporter of golf, and they've been a great supporter in Singapore especially. They also do the HSBC Rugby Sevens here as well, badminton. We've obviously gone through multiple reiterations of that contract, and we work with them to help deliver more benefits every year and realize more value for them using the event in Singapore as a platform. What's become interesting is through the COVID pandemic, really the goalposts have kind of changed a little bit in terms of benefits, how traditional benefits are delivered. Things that you would have thought like having a spectator village, having access to a large amount of hospitality has become less relevant because of the restrictions that we're currently under. So it's a complex but it's an exciting process in re-establishing what is most important to the client and how can we deliver that to the best of our ability within the context that we currently occupy. The other complex and exciting deals that I've been a part of is working with the tourism board to bring the event back to Singapore at the start of this year. Massively complex in terms of the restrictions and the way we need to pivot to new safe management measures, which are totally different to what we had done before. And the complexity and the difficulty and the challenge in that came through adopting those new practices rather than working with the government bodies who were very supportive and able to help us drive the conversation in the right area and help us create a balance between what is the safest way to do things, but also delivering the event for people in Singapore. So Tourism Board and HSBC have been the two most exciting and challenging and rewarding deals that I've worked on at IMG.
And maybe let's take our viewers on a journey back to before the pandemic. Can you share with them, maybe just to give us an idea, what are some of the commonly faced challenges in sports business development before the pandemic?
From the golf industry, a lot of the challenges come in terms of the schedule, the world schedule of golf. You obviously have a limited amount of weeks in the year to host an LPGA or an Asian Tour or a PGA event. And that the way that the schedule is developed is, for a lot of those tours, the LPGA and the PGA, most of the events are centered in the US domestically. So to create new events in Asia, which is a massive growth market for the industry, it's really about nailing down which weeks work. The weather in Asia can also be very different from the weather in other parts of the year. So it's about nailing down which weeks work, nailing down multiple partners in that role that create a swing of events, 4 or 5 events in a row, which make it more financially sustainable, which make it more attractive for players to compete, the top players, in terms of delivering those events. So schedule is something that we constantly look at, we're constantly keeping a close eye on so that we can make sure that not just one partner in one country, but 4 or 5 partners in 4 or 5 countries can get the best experience possible and help support the events as much as possible.
Right. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'll complement what Jeremy said. I think from a business standpoint, I think sports and sports monetization is still at an infancy in Asia. If you look at the US, for example, the most mature sports media property in the world, sports media industry in the world, about 40% of brands' marketing budgets is spent in some kind of sports activation for partners who choose to engage. In Asia, it's less than 5%. And so I think one of the biggest challenges I've had in my role and journey in the last 3 years is really educating partners, whether it's government bodies, whether it's brands, whether it's media agencies, that sports is an amazing way to engage a passionate fan base. One is blessed to have a fairly young demographic in terms of our audience. 80% are Gen Z and millennials between that age of 18 to 35, 36. And so, when we go out to the market to, have brands invest in sponsorships and things like that, the message really is we're not, advertising to people, because the Gen Z and millennials are actually turned off by advertising, when you hard sell something to them. This is a generation which wants to align behind a purpose or a cause and be authentically engaged. And so part of the education is how does a brand's narrative fit on top of an IP of someone like a ONE to genuinely attract and engage that fan base. And then, the output, which is the sales and all of that, will come. So that's been, a journey. So happy to say that, we see more and more brands investing in sports as a way to engage the fan bases. It's still a work in progress. We still have a long way to go to catch up with markets like the US and Europe. But I think, we're getting started and couldn't be more excited about what's ahead.
So I'm smirking because I think this is a business show, so we've always been trying to ask guests about numbers. So since you brought up numbers, can you share with us what is the maybe value of the sports business in Singapore or Asia?
Yeah, I think, when you look at, Asia as a whole, right? When we look at, just slicing the market, if you look at ad budgets of, about $200 billion a year, I think about 20 to 25 billion will eventually end up in some kind of sporting sponsorships. We're not there today. I think we're half of that today across all the sports media properties. But again, you see China is very strong in terms of coming and supporting sports. You see India is very strong as well in terms of things like cricket and the IPL, which is a commercial beast in itself. Southeast Asia will be the final frontier in my mind. So Singapore plus all the ASEAN countries adopting. I mean, North Asia, Japan and Korea, high GDP markets, they get and understand sports. So I think for Asia as a whole, to align behind this as a great way to, especially after the pandemic, or as we come out of the other end of the pandemic, I think people have been cooped up at home quite a bit. They miss going to the stadium. They miss watching their live events. And I think people are just, when the restrictions and the safe management measures permit, people will be out in numbers, both in the stadium as well as in broadcast to cheer on their heroes. And, I think that pent-up demand exists today. And that's only great news for businesses that invest in sports.
Right. What about you, Jeremy? Do you think that moving forward, the sponsorships or the value of live events can just go up in Singapore or in Asia?
I think both. Absolutely, I think both. I think that what we are seeing now as we exit the pandemic and as we transition into a stabilization phase and we start to plot what the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years will look like, I think you're seeing Singapore reestablish itself as a premier sporting destination in the region. And I think that what has spoken to that is that through the pandemic time, you're also seeing events like the WTA coming in. We're seeing table tennis coming in, the Suzuki Cup at the end of the year coming in. And I think the great advantage that Singapore has is that it has established itself as an outrunner, an outlier in terms of running safe events. And because of that, it's driving a lot of increased business to the region. Talk about regionally, I think sports regionally, and Harry touched on this point before, still in its infancy, still a lot of work to do in terms of, like you say, educating, but the investment is there. And a lot of companies have shown that they're willing to invest as well. but it's about growing that pot, and it's about bringing more partners on. It might not necessarily be about bringing that one big partner on, but it might be more about bringing 10 smaller partners on and building them up and educating them about how they can use sports as a platform to drive value for their business and do what they want to do. And historically, we're seeing that. I mean, the sporting industry in Asia has grown immensely over the last 10, 20 years. But like Harry says, still a lot of catch up to do to get to, plateaued markets or more developed markets like the UK or the US. But there's every indication that we are trending in that way.
And I think on the ground, you can feel it as well from the consumer point of view. People always get so excited and so pumped up when a big sporting event comes here. And although you guys have both mentioned some events that have started taking place, you still represent one of the few who have managed to pull off a big event in Singapore during the pandemic. Can you share some of the challenges that you faced doing that?
Yeah, at ONE, we've been blessed to work with the Singapore Tourism Board and the Singapore government. As you may know, Temasek and GIC have invested in ONE as well, so we have amazing support from the government. What the Singapore government entrusted us to do last year, the pandemic shut down everything for the first 5 or 6 months of last year. The last event we did just before the pandemic hit was March 2020, and then we had a 5-month hiatus, and then the Singapore government said, hey, why don't we work with someone like you to define safe management measures of running a sports event again, albeit with an empty stadium at first. How do we create a travel bubble with the country? Because our athletes come from so many different countries. Of course, we had some in Singapore as well. And we had to work with them to define all the protocols, the health protocols, ambulances on standby, make sure we had buffer capacity in hospitals. I mean, all of that was really took a few months to define. And we were very excited that come October last year, we were able to again work with STB to bring back I think the first live sporting event back in Singapore and even in Asia back in October. And as we were talking with Jeremy earlier, I think these kind of things, and then them doing the HSBC, and then the tennis tournament, the whole industry got more educated, and I think everyone won out of that to be able to now in 2021 do more periodic events. So now every 2 weeks we do a live event at the Singapore Indoor Stadium. The restrictions have permitted between 250 to 1,000 people in the stadium, depending on what phase of the circuit breaker or lockdowns we were in. But I think this is now something that is part of the IP of companies like IMG, companies like ONE, which we can export. So tomorrow, if we're going and doing an event in Thailand or in the Middle East or in Australia, we can export some of the learning and the thinking behind how to run events successfully. So big kudos to the team at STB. They have been thought partners and thought leaders. They're pushing the envelope for Singapore to be on the map in terms of running safe sports and esports events. And earlier this year also, we ran the largest esports tournament in the world in Q1. It was called the ONE Esports Dota 2 Major, and it had almost 275 million viewers globally. So again, putting Singapore on the world map. We couldn't do it in the Singapore Indoor Stadium, but we did it at the Fairmont Hotel, and it had these almost 300 million viewers. So very excited to partner with the government of Singapore and with STB and all the other ministries involved to make this happen.
How about yourself, Jeremy? What are some of the during pandemic challenges?
Well, I mean, it's a very similar situation for us at IMG for the HSBC Women's World Championship. I think the ONE FC event happening at the end of 2020 helped us immensely in terms of obviously ONE FC and golf differ in the way that the events are run in terms of the sport, but it helped us create a baseline and work from a baseline of COVID protocols that are required in terms of international travel. Some things are very similar in that way. It was a challenge. It was a challenge to get those safe management measures in place and to execute things like, pro-ams and having all your players fly in from America and very, very different countries as well. It was also a process to educate a lot of those athletes on what to expect whilst they were in Singapore. But the great thing about it all is that we have now developed a reputation as being one of the companies like ONE FC who are able to develop and execute events in a COVID-19 world. And that's helped us open up the rest of Asia in terms of professional golf events and professional events. So it really was a pivotal moment that we were able to run the event in 2021. It was difficult at times, but working with the tourism board and Sports SG, they really helped guide us through the process and establish how we could run it to the best of our ability and to the best of Singapore's ability. What's great is that the COVID pandemic has, in a way, forced us to innovate in a lot of areas, especially when it comes to social and digital, and especially when it comes to how we deliver our hospitality offering. And I think that's great because on the one hand, Singapore is establishing itself as a major player in sports in Southeast Asia, but it also has a reputation of innovation and being at the forefront of everything. And now we're seeing those two worlds combine because we have to innovate and we have to evolve to be able to deliver sports. So it's a really exciting time. And some of the things that we have implemented will now become standard operating practice as we move forward out of the pandemic. A focus on digital, the way that the way consumers interact with our media is changing, OTT platforms, and broadcast is still incredibly important, but we're seeing that consumers are interacting with different things, and we learned that as a trial by fire to a certain extent because we weren't able to have spectators come to the event, so we had to explore different ways that they could interact with it. So it's a really exciting time, very, very, very challenging, but also very, very rewarding to come through that.
I feel like you both also started answering the next question that I was going to ask you, which is about how you think creating a sports business in Singapore compares to the rest of the world. And from what I'm hearing, there's also, and we can see it as well, there's a lot of support from STB, our tourism board, there's a lot of support from Sport Singapore. Do you think this is a huge difference compared to creating a sports business outside of Singapore?
See, I think at ONE, we haven't had the experience of doing something outside Singapore, but our experience in Singapore has been very positive. See, Singapore is a small country. It's punching above its weight. It's trying to be, as I said, on the world map, in the same conversation like a China or a Middle East or the US or Europe. And so I think with a country like this, with limited resources and a small population, what we are getting as support from the government or thought leadership or just infrastructure or policies are very friendly to sports. And I think that's great. This is it's an easy place to do business, which is why so many companies have headquarters in Singapore, even outside sports. The taxation rules are very favorable. Hiring and finding great talent is quite easy in Singapore. I think we're blessed with plenty of talent from all around the world. I think it's just been a dream for us to be based out of Singapore. Could we have done it in other countries? We could have. But from what we understand and what we've experienced, this is one of the best places in the world to do business, and we're happy to be here.
And apart from the governmental level, where we've seen a lot of support, how about with the businesses, the sponsors, the brands? It sounds like you guys both also have a pretty good time working here.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add on to that. I think we've been again quite happy with being based in Singapore, just given a lot of decision makers for a lot of sponsors of ours are based in Singapore. Some of them are based in places like Hong Kong and China, but especially during the pandemic when we couldn't travel, we had to do a lot of meetings on Zoom, even with folks based in Singapore. But even when the restrictions eased, we were actually able to meet face to face with some decision makers. And I think, again, being in a place like Singapore, which has the headquarters of so many Fortune 500 companies just here, allows it to be very easy to do business, either face to face or even remotely. I think it's the density of businesses and what we want to do with these businesses in Singapore makes it quite easy to do business. Yeah.
Is that your experience as well, doing events?
Yeah, it's Singapore is quite a small market geographically, but you have a density of very, very passionate companies who are very, very interested in getting involved in sports sponsorship. We've worked with a number of companies, not necessarily local Singaporean companies, but Fortune 500 companies who are based out of here in Singapore. The other thing I would mention is infrastructure here. It makes it very, very easy to do an event in a way. You have a lot of really, really nice hotels in a very, very limited area. We have some of the best golf clubs in the world. Sentosa Golf Club just continues to win. I've lost count of how many awards they win because they seem to win a new award I think last year they were voted the best golf club in the world. So there's no other place in Asia to host its premier LPGA golf event than in Singapore. We work with partners like Fairmont, Swiss Hotel, who are high-end hotels. So the proximity of all these companies from a sponsorship perspective, but also from an infrastructure perspective, lend Singapore to be a really, really easy place to run an event from that perspective as well.
I think you have both also shared with us how you very quickly and successfully managed to find opportunities to adjust your business models during the pandemic. Moving forward, do you think some of these practices that you have learned will stay? Or do you think that, we'll go back to a bit more of what we used to do before in organizing live sports?
With ONE, we started as a sports media company 10 years ago. And, 2 years ago, just again before the pandemic, we started ONE Esports, which is now the top 3 gaming and esports platforms in the world for content and storytelling. And actually during the pandemic, ONE Studios was born, which is basically our reality and lifestyle arm in terms of content and storytelling. And we managed to produce, again during the pandemic in Singapore, the first iteration of The Apprentice One Championship Edition, which is a business, reality and sports related show. Had the pandemic not happened, maybe ONE Studios would not have been born. But it so happened at the time, because live events were shut down, we had to do something. We worked with MGM Studios in the US and Mark Burnett and his team. We worked with our athletes and tried to integrate them into the show. We found some great sponsors like Bentley and Toomey and all of these at Singapore Tourism Board. And we made it happen with shooting a reality show in the pandemic in Singapore in the heat in December with masks on is quite a challenge. And we had a great partner in Refinery Media, which is another homegrown local production company helped by Karen Seah. And she and the team did a great job pulling this off. And then that show will be aired on Netflix starting next year. So again, we're very happy to again be one of the first companies in Asia to create a reality show during the pandemic. And that's again what STB wanted out of that was to highlight the different facets of Singapore, not just the skyline and the backdrop or the food, but really talk about local entrepreneurship. So we highlighted some great CEOs out of Singapore, like Anthony Tan of Grab, Kishan RK of Tiffin Labs, and RB Capital, and a few more, right? And then we highlighted all the amazing adventure and things you could do in Singapore, which even I didn't know about, either in Sentosa or in remote parts of Singapore. So we put Singapore in a new light from a culture, doing business, people perspective. And I think we broadcast that to the world. We saw what STB had done with shows on HBO before, and I think we took it to another level. So I think, again, we pivoted. A lot of our brands who couldn't get a lot of the entitlements during the 5 months of hiatus we had, we pivoted them to entitlements on ONE Esports. We also got them to participate in something like The Apprentice. So even though there was one part of our businesses had kind of paused for a while, as Jeremy said, a lot of the entitlements and pivots happened on digital, happened on esports, happened on The Apprentice, and I think the partners are very happy with that. And happy to say, more than 70% of these partners have come back to us, even with budget shrunk and all of that. They said, we like what you did, we like the level of service and the account management. You held our hand during the pandemic, you did the right thing. And these are partners that we consider long-term partners.
Yeah, wow. How about yourself, Jeremy? Do you have anything to add to?
Yeah, I think you can't understate the importance of having long-term partnerships who understand the situation that you're in. But absolutely, I mean, pivoting to social, digital, we streamed our event live on Facebook, which we hadn't done before. We worked to develop a digital hospitality program that if you couldn't attend the event, you could log on to a specific platform and interact with bespoke content with players. And so you might not be able to meet the player in the hospitality suite anymore, but you can interact with them online. And what we're discovering is that these are all things that have been so well received that there's no real reason why they should stop moving forward out of the pandemic. In fact, we should expand it, we should accelerate it. And instead of looking at a digital hospitality program that only sits in Singapore, we should expand it regionally. And that enables regional participants to engage with content. Harry, you spoke about this before, helping the tourism board re-establish Singapore as a premier tourism destination. through content with players experiencing things on Sentosa and, zip lining and all these other kinds of things. We also worked with Golfing World or Golf TV to create a show that highlighted various different tourism aspects of Singapore, Sentosa, but also outside of Sentosa in mainland Singapore as well. So it's been a great opportunity to innovate and to look at doing new things. And what we're finding is these things are so well received that we need to keep doing them. And it's a value add proposition as we move into future years.
These are some of the most amazing stories of pivoting from the pandemic, such successful examples. Do you think you have any advice for other businesses that might still be struggling from the pandemic?
See, I think even though we're here sitting today and talking about these success stories, it's a tough journey, right? It is hard. A lot of experiments that you may try will not work out. But I think you have to have the grit and resilience and resolve to push through. So my advice is stay perseverant, stay hungry, try to be as innovative as you can, seek out partners who can push your thinking in terms of how you want to change the face of the game or the sport. Embrace things that are going well as well. Like as Jeremy was saying, for us, our organic digital video views went from about 6 billion last year to now on pace this year for about 25 billion. So that's a 4x jump, and we didn't expect it. It's just because people were staying home, consuming a lot of the shoulder content apart from the live matches. We put out videos every day. So now that has become a bigger part of the sell for us, for our sponsors, versus the live event on-ground entitlements when we have 1,000 people in the stadium. So I think it's really understanding, creating, and adapting and embracing the change. One thing we could have done is just complain about the situation and put our heads in the sand. But I think 18 months in, we know this is here to stay. To survive, we've got to, embrace reality and put our best foot forward. And I think perseverance, grit, and resilience are the key ingredients of that.
Right. Jeremy, did you feel like during the pandemic that made businesses more willing to collaborate, or businesses and institutions more willing to collaborate, or has it always been at that level for IMG events?
I think anytime there's great challenge, it brings people closer together and it brings companies closer together. And what we noticed was that it wasn't about, as it relates to HSBC Women's, it was about growing together. It was about the event growing with partners together to come up with new solutions that were a win-win for everybody. And I think that's really important because it just underpins the relationships that we have, and it underpins the willingness to take risk as well. Grit, resilience, risk, these are all important things to have. You may have 10 great ideas, 9 of them may fail, but you must know that you keep going to get that one at the end, which props everything up. You have to be brave, and you have to show a willingness to evolve with the time. You cannot sit there and think, well, everything will be better in 3 months' time. I think the pandemic has shown that things can change rapidly, things can change fast. Delta variant has changed a lot in how we respond to things. But you need to be able to stay flexible, and you need to be able to adapt to deliver within the parameters that are set. Those parameters are there for a reason, obviously. In Singapore, you establish the safest way to do things, but then you establish how you can deliver the most within those parameters. And it takes a lot of bravery, and it takes a lot of willingness to accept risk to be able to take that on. But it's very, very difficult to do that, but it's important at this stage, I think.
So having gone through all this, what is your outlook for the future of sports 2022 and beyond?
I think sports in Singapore specifically will continue to grow, and I think we're seeing a lot of sporting events that are happening. Not just sporting events, other events as well, MICE events that are coming to Singapore. I think you mentioned the Suzuki Cup and things like that before. Golf, especially in Singapore, will continue to grow. I can't mention anything now, but I know there are a lot of golf events on the horizon who are looking to establish themselves in Singapore. And again, this all speaks back to the fact that a lot of other countries in the region and globally have fully locked down and closed down. But Singapore has said to itself, there obviously needs to be a certain level of safe management, but we need to keep innovating and we need to keep executing these world-class events so that when the pandemic comes to an end, we're a step ahead to be able to develop that further and bring new things in. So I think it's a tremendously exciting time for sports in Singapore.
What is your take on that, Harry? The
Absolutely,
future?
I concur with what Jeremy said. I think Singapore is blessed to have a very high vaccination rate, to be able to have that bravery and resolve to continue pushing forward next year, right? If we think about all the things that we could be doing. This year has been a year of pilots with different sports bodies, with different IP holders. MICE events are back. I think concerts will be back. I would love, on a lighter note, for the pre-event testing to probably just be replaced with something much easier and not as intrusive as a PCR. I think we're getting there with breath tests and other things, just to reduce any friction for the attendee or the fan to come in. But I think, for sports, I see Singapore as a very sports-loving nation. The level of fitness is quite high as a country. On a per capita basis, I think people see this as a form of entertainment. And again, I think when you look at people following football and cricket and basketball, all these other sports in Singapore and themselves being fit, I think someone like us who is trying to put Asian sports on the global map, I see the world of possibilities. And we're very proud again to be based here. I think next year will hopefully be the best one yet for all of us. And I think it's the new normal. We embrace it, and there's nothing stopping any of us from, shining.
Right, and I think there are a lot of us here who are just starving to attend many of these sporting events in person again.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Good one.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have learned so much from Harry and Jeremy today. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and make sure you tune in next time on our next episode of ISSB.